Welcome everybody. I'd like to thank you for logging on to tonight's live stream meeting. It's the first one for Illawarra Beekeepers, and we're hoping it's going to be a successful night. So I'd like to thank Emmanuel very much for putting this on. It's a tremendous effort on Emmanuel's part by making all of this happen. We've been talking about it for a few months now, and we're really lucky that we've got someone like Emmanuel to be able to help us do our live stream. So welcome all to our new members of the club as well. We've got now over 320 members in our club, which is absolutely fantastic, and so welcome to all the new people, and hopefully we will get to meet you all one day. So it's our intention tonight to answer some questions that people have got over bee swarming, preventing bee swarms, that sort of thing. So you can enter your questions online. Is that right, Emmanuel? Sorry. Yeah, we're entering questions online. Type away, and we have someone here that's going to read them out and we will answer them. We've got a couple of things just to note as well. Our beginners courses are going ahead again. Our first one for the year will be this weekend, and it's been booked out, which is really fantastic. And we have another one happening on the 7th of November. So please, if you are interested in doing a beekeeping course for beginners, drop us an email through the website. Our Facebook group page too is another thing that we've got running. We've got a new members-only Facebook group, and you can join that as well through the Facebook, the Illawarra Beekeepers Facebook site. And it is just for members, so you do have to answer a question, and it is only for members. This month is AFB month, and the ABA newsletter went out this week, so this will be the cover of it. I hope everybody's logged on and had a read of it. It's very informative, and AFB is something that's very important here in the Sydney area at the moment. There's lots of it going around, so please check your hives. You can check the DPI website for instructions on how to do this properly. Please, everybody, it's an important subject. So without any more ado, I would like to introduce to you our guest tonight, which is Bruce White, and Bruce is here to help me answer some questions that are hopefully coming through from everybody, and he's also going to give us a bit of a rundown on the videos that he recently did, and we put them on our website too. So welcome, Bruce.
Thanks very much, Penny, and welcome everyone to this first virtual meeting for Illawarra Club. It's the way of the world now, and most ABA clubs are having to do virtual meetings, which is not as good as face-to-face. It's very pleasing that this club, for the new members, have got the opportunity to do a beginning in bees course, and I'd certainly encourage all new beekeepers to do the beginning in bees course so that you've got a better understanding of bees, and you can look at hives. Even before you buy hives, it's important, I think, to do that so that you become familiar with bees and can understand bees. With beekeeping, there's two aspects to it. One is being able to handle the bees in the colony or the hives, and the second one is to be able to read the conditions in the field, and bees respond totally to what's available in the field. Most of the ABA members have got hives in permanent locations in your backyard, or if you've got a hobby farm somewhere, you've got the bees there, whereas commercial beekeepers study flora and move colonies to where the best floral conditions are. The management of hives for people that have got stationary apiaries is quite different to the commercial beekeeper's operation. So I encourage everyone to get an idea of what flora's around your area. Go and have a look at the plants, give them a shake. If you give them a shake, you'll often get pollen from the anthers of the flowers on your hand, and that can be any colour depending on the species of plant. and the protein content's going to vary greatly, and that will depend a lot on how the queen and the colony breeds and the longevity of the bees. The higher the protein content, the longer your bees are going to live. For example, radiata pine's only 4% protein, whereas eucalypt's about 20% protein. Some weeds can be 40% protein. The other thing, when you shake the blossom, you'll find out if there's any nectar in the blossom. So by shaking the blossom, you'll get moisture on your hands. That means there's nectar there. So you need to, taste that, and that'll tell you if it's dew overnight. If you do it early in the morning, you often only get dew, which is like water, which is water. But if it's sweet, it's nectar. It's important to know that. And this time of the year, the topic we're going to talk about tonight is swarming and managing swarms. And this time of the year, bees are stimulated to breed a lot, and in some areas they may be getting honey and some or nectar, and some areas they may not be. Nectar comes from the flowers. The bees convert that to honey by evaporating the moisture out of the nectar, reducing it down to about below 21% because it's 34 degrees inside a beehive. That's when it's a cap over it, that's when it's honey. So often this time of the year, because there's a lot of nectar around, and the thinner the nectar, the hotter the hive gets at night, ripening that nectar. Encourage everyone, after this is over, if you've got bees in your backyard, wander down the backyard and have a listen. If your bees have been getting nectar today, there'll be an audible, quite loud noise at your hive, which means that the bees are getting a lot of thin nectar, and that's going to encourage them to swarm because they generate heat. The queen lays more eggs because of the heat, and there's a lot of pollen coming in now. Also encourage you through the day to stand behind your hive and look over the back of the hive to the entrance. Don't stand in front of the hive, and just see how many bees are bringing in different coloured pollen. The more different coloured pollens, the greater the protein that's coming into the hive, the greater the variation in the amino acids and everything else that's in pollen, and that's more likely when they're likely to swarm. So swarming is a natural means by bees which increase the number of bees in a given area. So what happens is, usually if the colony becomes overcrowded this time of the year, the queen will lay in cells that have been constructed as queen cells, and they're called swarm cells, and there'll be 12 to 15 in a normal colony. And Emmanuel shot a video that I was involved with that shows you, what swarm cells look like. If the queen is really old, they may want to supersede at this time of the year. So sometimes bees will requeen their own colony, not always. If that's the case, you'll only see 3 cells normally that have been constructed as queen cells on the face of the comb, and they're supersede your cells. Don't touch them, just leave them alone. If you accidentally kill the queen, and that's happening more commonly than a lot of people think it is, but it's good to look at your hives. You've got to be very careful when you look at hives so you don't kill the queen. They'll build about 30 cells. They're on the face of the comb because they've converted larvae that were going to be worker bees to queen cells and feed them lavishly on royal jelly. So if you kill a queen, a larva that's under 24 hours of age, the bees reshape that cell, and by feeding a lot of royal jelly, make it a peanut-shaped cell, that will become a queen bee. If you see that, you've got to leave it alone because that's the only way the colony can requeen itself. So they're 4 days old. The queen hatches in 16 days old, so 12 days after the bees have started to feed that larva that was 24 hours old, because the egg is 3 days old. That bee will emerge 12 days later as a queen, and then she mates within the first 10 days of her life, but with many males, usually on the 5th and the 7th day. So a colony consists of many families, depending on how many drones mate with that queen. The more drones she mates with, the greater the variation in the bees, and maybe the more productive the colony is. She can get about 7 million sperm in a thing called a spermatheca, where all the sperm are stored. Then when she lays in an egg, in a cell that's going to produce a worker, she fertilises that egg and it becomes a worker bee. She lays in a larger cell, which is a drone cell. The egg is not fertilised and that becomes a male bee. This time of the year, it's important to look at your hives probably every month or 3 weeks, which is the cycle of brood. So 21 days for a worker bee to come out, 24 for a drone, to see if there's any queen cells in the colony. People with flow hives, it's really important that you check your flow hives or try and get another box to make them 3 boxes high so the cavity's big enough. The disadvantage of swarming this time of the year is that you lose half your bees. When a colony swarms, it's normal for half the bees to go with the old queen. Therefore, you've lost half your workers in that colony. The new hive a virgin will hatch. The swarm usually goes 2 or 3 days before the first queen cell hatches. And that's called the prime swarm. So she goes off, hangs on a bush, that's the swarm. But you've lost half your bees. So if you can prevent bees from swarming, you've got a big population when most of the honey's going to come on. So for the next 2 or 3 months, around Sydney and maybe into the autumn, depending where you live, that's when you get your honey crop. If you don't have a big population of bees, you reduce the amount of potential honey your bees are going to get. The videos looked at ways to prevent swarming, by adding comb foundation, by taking brood away, by taking bees away, to put into weaker colonies, or by adding a box or extracting the hives. The easiest thing people can probably do now is to extract the hives because a lot of thin nectar coming in. Make sure 2/3 capped before you extract it. And that gives the bees something to do. If colonies have got something to do and they've got a big enough cavity, they're less likely to swarm. Unfortunately, some strains of bees just swarm all the time. And that's just a genetic characteristics that some bees do that. So you might get 2 or 3 swarms. It's normal if there's no management for a colony to swarm once or twice a year if conditions are good. And I mean conditions, plenty of pollen coming in, plenty of nectar coming in, because of the big population increase. And that's what normally, does happen. So, we'd welcome any questions, if there's any questions at the present time about swarming. I'm happy to answer them, with Penny as well.
I've got one for you so far, Bruce.
Right.
That man is just a font of knowledge, so he can go on and on and on. Thank you, Bruce. You're amazing. Just a couple of quick questions I've got for you. An empty queen cell in a hive, they can't find a young queen. So how long would you wait after a hive has swarmed to say that young queen will come back to the hive?
Okay, thanks for that question. That's really good. So once your hive swarms, I mentioned just previously that the swarm usually leaves, the cells hatch in the hive that the swarm left from 2 to 3 days after the swarm has left. So the swarm leaves with the old queen. The old queen stops laying. That's important because laying queens can't fly. So she stops laying, and then 2 days before the first cells hatch, and swarm cells can vary in age. They don't start swarm cells all on the same day. They might start them over 2 or 3 days, so they're different ages. So the swarm leaves. 2 days later, that first queen will come out, which will be a virgin queen, and she goes around and kills all the other cells by stinging them and chewing holes in the side. So she is the dominant one. If 2 virgins hatch together, they have a fight, and that can be dangerous because one of or both virgins might get damaged and they can't fly. So virgin queens don't mate in the hive. They always mate on the wing, as I mentioned before, about the 5th and 7th day with many drones. And science has proven the things called drone congregation areas. So drones from 3 or so kilometres around go to a certain area, they give off pheromones, and all the virgin queens in that area will go to that drone congregation area. The fastest queens mate with the virgin queen, they die, and she might mate with 15 drones in those first 10 days on the 5th and 7th day. She comes back to the colony, Penny, and then 10 days after she emerges, she starts to lay eggs. So really, if a swarm goes, it's 14 days before you'll see eggs because of the 2-day gap from when the swarm left before the first virgin hatches. So you're looking at 14 days. Now, it's unwise to open a hive, at the 14th day because you need a lot of skill quite often to find a queen bee, and secondly, to find eggs. Eggs are very small, so you're probably better off, to wait over those 12 days, I would say probably 18th or 20 days, before you look at your colony. Now, when you look at your colony to find out if there's a queen present, you see brood. So if you see brood in the cells, which are white C-shaped larvae in the cells, you don't necessarily have to find the queen. If you've got to find the queen, that's much more difficult. So you see brood, that's fine. Now, if you don't see any brood, it's important if you've got another hive, and we always say, and courses always teach, 2 hives, not 1 in a backyard. So if you've got another hive in the backyard, you've got brood in that other hive, you pick a frame of brood out and put into the hive that supposedly has got no queen in it. Now, if there's no queen in it, you can look at it 2 days later, and if the bees start queen cells on that, there's no queen present. If they don't start queen cells on that, there is a queen present, and you haven't seen her and you haven't seen the brood. So 14 days after, there should be brood in the hive, but wait 18, 20 days before you actually look in the hive that's swarmed.
Excellent. So I think what's happening, Bruce, is probably a lot of people are concerned that their hives have swarmed and they're checking them too soon after so you're saying, 14, 16 days later.
Yeah, the symptoms, the signs are much more obvious.
Yeah.
And the important thing is don't shift the hive. A hive swarm, just leave it. Don't go near it, because the virgin queen's got to go out and come back, and that's a risk. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of bird-eating, bees in Australia, but that's a risk. So the virgin goes out. She's got to go to the drone congregation area, which might be 2 kilometres away. It might be 300 metres. Could be 3 kilometres away. That's a risk, because she's a big insect. Birds eat her, she doesn't come back. Or she comes back and you've shifted a pot plant in your backyard, or you've shifted something, or put another box on the hive, or taken the box off. She then doesn't recognise a home. Yeah. And if she doesn't recognise a home, she's lost to the colony.
So another thing too, Bruce, swarms that are queenless, why would that happen?
Swarms that are queenless occasionally happen. So there are 2 types, well, I suppose there's 3 types of swarms. So we go through the 3 types of swarms for a start. There's the prime swarm, which is the first swarm that leaves the colony. Now, remember I mentioned just a while ago that swarm cells aren't started all on the same day. So it might be 2 or 3 days the colony will start swarm cells, so they're different ages. So sometimes if a colony is super strong, we get what we call an after swarm. So the prime swarm goes out with the original mated queen. An after swarm has got a virgin queen with it, and it's usually smaller, and it usually goes fairly high in a tree, because virgins are good flyers. Mated queens are not good flyers because they've had to stop to be able to fly, so they usually swarm down fairly low. And the third one is a swarm that absconds. Now, it's not likely to happen this time of the year, but in the autumn you get small hive beetle will actually chase colonies out and they'll swarm. You get disease in hives. They'll sometimes leave the disease and swarm, not always, and they're usually smaller swarms. So you've got prime swarm, after swarm, and absconding swarm. Now, why do they go with no queen? There can be 2 reasons. When the swarm goes out, the queen pipes and keeps the bees together, and for some reason there's been a lot of noise, there's a siren, ambulance gone past, or a police or something like that, and the bees can't hear the piping queen, but they still keep going, and then they can land and the piping queen is somewhere else without the bees because they've lost contact with her and she's lost contact with them. A bird can grab her, because people that have seen swarms, it's quite scary, masses of bees in the air. The queen and the drones are the biggest, so a bird might come and shoot the queen that was to go with the swarm. She's lost. Now, quite often, beekeepers used to clip the wings of queens so they couldn't fly. And so they knew they had that queen in the hive as a permanent mark, as opposed to putting a dot on it. So hives will still swarm with clipped queens, wings clipped on the queen. So the swarm will go out, and they'll go without the queen, but they'll still go because they're all excited about going. They'll land on a bush, but the queen, because she can't fly, she'll come out and quite often just get on the ground, ants will eat her, she won't find her way back into the colony, and that's when an after swarm often goes. If the queen can't fly, they'll go with a virgin. So that's another reason why a swarm could go out. Now, usually swarms that often go out without queens will actually come back to the colony because they've realised they've got no queen. So they'll go back to the parent colony, then they'll swarm with a virgin. When you catch swarms, they get into all sorts of funny positions. So when you go to bee hives, no matter what, everyone kills bees. I kill bees, everyone kills bees, because there's so many bees. As careful as you are, there's always a mortality. So when you're catching the swarm, you could accidentally kill the queen, and then you take it home and there's no queen there. Usually queens, if you take them home, they've got no queen, they'll often abscond because they've got no queen. What I say to people is, provided you know your bees are healthy, and everyone should know what healthy brood looks like, that's critical, white in colour, C-shaped larva, nothing ropes out, no holes in the caps and all that. If you bring a swarm home, it's wise to put a frame of brood in it that's young brood. So bees will rarely abscond, or swarms will rarely abscond if there's a frame of brood in that hive. Now, if you put a frame of young brood in the hive and you didn't bring the queen home, what's going to happen? Answer the question yourselves, and I'll give you the answer in a minute. The answer is that if you put young brood in that swarm, the bees will start emergency cells because they've got no queen. So they'll start 30 cells, usually on the face of that comb, to replace the queen. Now you've got to wait, for that queen to develop and to mate, and you need to wait, for that to happen, 18, 20 days before you look again. But that'll tell you if you've got a queen in the hive, or if you haven't got a queen in the hive, by putting the frame of brood in. Now, swarms also often abscond if they get overheated. When you catch a swarm, it's critical that they've got something to hang on. You don't just put them in a cardboard box and put it in the back of your car and away you go. Because they gorge themselves on honey, they'll bounce up and down and they'll smother. You never put frames of honey or sugar or anything with a swarm because they're already full of nectar. If you do that, they'll abscond because they've got nowhere to put the nectar and the sugar syrup. So never put honey or frames when you catch a swarm. That's vital. You also need to provide air. You can get bees overheated, get them home, but they're so hot and frustrated. As soon as you let them out, they'll take off because they've been overheated. They're still alive, but they've been overheated. So you don't do that. The other thing to do with when you catch a swarm is to let the bees go in wherever you're located, pick it up, and if you're going to take it 3 or 4 kilometres, that's fine, let it out. If you get one in your backyard, as soon as the bees go into that box, pick it up and put it where you want to put it. Don't leave it, for a day and then decide to shift it to where you want it. You can pick it up straight away when most of the bees are in, put it where you want it. That swarm loses its memory and they'll reorientate back to where you put it straight away. Any bees that are out scouting or anywhere else, they'll go back to the original colony because the original colony is probably in your backyard, where it's swarmed from. So I've probably gone on a fair bit, but I want to explain everything. So you quite often get swarms with no queen in it. Usually if the queen's been clipped or you accidentally, kill her, or she's got lost in the flight to where they've clustered from.
Excellent. I think we've got a couple of viewer questions, have we?
We've got a question from Stephen from the web. He has some queen cells and he puts down the super seed cells in the middle of 3 frames, and he has identified that the queen is still present and the brood pattern looks good. He wants to know, can he split the hive to get a second hive out using those queen cells that haven't hatched yet?
Yeah, Steve, that's probably a good idea if you want another colony. So usually supersedure cells produce the best queens because the colony's got a queen in it already and they slowly feed those cells. And commercial queen breeders trick bees into starting supersedure cells when we do queen rearing courses, and that's what Illawarra teach when we do a queen rearing course. Swarm cells are okay because there's already a queen in the colony then, but emergency cells are not good because they're not fed as well because the colony's trying to feed 30 cells and they don't feed them properly, so the queens are often runts and don't perform as well. So in the case of Steve, where he's got 3 cells, they well could be supersedure cells. A general rule, it's not hard and fast. if you've got 3 or so cells, the hive superseding the queen and requeening the colony itself. Now, when that happens, you've got 2 queens in the hive. That's not uncommon, more common than people think. So when hives supersede, the mother stays in the colony with the daughter, and they both lay eggs, and maybe 2 months, 3 months later, the queen will disappear, the original one, and the young daughter will take over. So you can have 2 queens in a hive when they supersede. So Steve, what you need to do is to turn your hive around 180 degrees and put another box beside that hive and just shift it to one side slightly. Take the frames out with the queen cells in them, and make sure that you've got the queen in the other box. So you need to separate the queen in the colony from the cells. By turning your hive around, the fool bees from the hive where the cells were will fly into where you put the other box, because it's facing the direction of the original hive. The hive that you turned around's got a lot of brood in it. That brood will hatch, and those bees will then become fool bees. The age of bees is only partly relevant. It's what the need of the colony is. So if you trick bees and the bees have lost all their fool bees, so by you turning that round, Steve, you're losing all your fool bees from the original hive, and they're going into the hive where you put the queen cells, and there's still some brood in there. The bees where you turned the hive around, in theory, are all nurse bees. So generally nurse bees are up to 3 weeks of age, and then from then on they become fool bees. But even those bees where you turned the hive around are only 3 weeks of age, they're going to become fool bees, some of them. Otherwise the colony will die. So they're becoming fool bees at a much younger age, and both colonies will survive. Now the one that you've turned around, those cells are going to hatch depending on how old they are. So if they come out, say, 10 days after they hatch, they're going to mate and start laying, and then I said, wait for 18 days so you're sure there's brood and that in there. So you need to check the colony with the cells in, probably 18 days time, to see if that virgin had gone out, mated and come back. Now, if you want to have both your hives facing the same way, which most people do, once that queen is mated where the cells were in that hive, the other one, which was the way that was originally facing, you can just turn that round, 20 degrees each day until you get it back to the way you want it faced where it was before, and then you can split them apart, or you can leave them sit together, whatever you want to do. So that's how you turn a hive around and then reorientate it back. You can't just pick it up and turn it around 180 degrees because the bees will all try and go in the back. But if you do it slowly, they'll come around and eventually end up where you want them at the front.
Thank you. We've got one question from Peter. He's asking a philosophical question. Is it irresponsible to let a hive swarm?
You want to answer that, or? Well,
yeah, I think it is. My personal opinion, I think it is irresponsible. You should try and prevent your hive from swarming. One of the main reasons, I think, is because of the fact that that swarm becomes somebody else's problem. And realistically, it's your bees, you should be looking after them. So, yeah, try and do what you can to prevent them from swarming. As Bruce says, you lose half your bees, you lose a whole load of honey. So we don't really want our hives to swarm. So what are your thoughts, Bruce? Do you agree?
Yeah, that's fine, Penny. Yeah. I mean, the only advantage of a hive swarming is, that you're getting your hive requeened with a young queen. So what we say is that it's probably wise to requeen hives every 2 years in your situation if you're in a backyard. Commercial beekeepers requeen every 12 months because they move to conditions to stimulate the queen to lay, and their philosophy is to have queens laying 12 months of the year, and in Australia, bees will breed 12 months of the year depending on where they're located and what flora is available. So in New South Wales, bees can breed 12 months of the year. In your situation where they're in your backyard, as I mentioned previously, they totally respond to what your flora is. And that's why I said, have a look around, see what's going to flower, right, have a diary, this flowers this month, that month, whatever. And most shrubs and weeds and that flower annually, most eucalypts every 2 or 3 years. So, therefore, if you recoin every 2 years, you completely change the colony, right? So 100% of the bees are different after about 8 weeks, because bees normally only live about 8 weeks in the spring, summer and early autumn. So you can completely change your colony within 8 weeks by recoining the colony. Penny gave good advice. You don't want to cause nuisance to other people by letting your bees swarm. And the only gain is you get a young queen, and it's pot luck who she mates with. Commercial queen breeders do genetic improvement programs. Tokal's got $1 million to do a genetic improvement program. I think it's $1 million, huge amount of money anyway. So there's a lot of genetics in bees, and if you buy from a commercial queen breeder, you should get stock that are productive and docile. The other thing I'd say is, if you've got 2 or 3 hives in your backyard, swap your queen breeders around. Don't buy all from the one queen breeder. Get from a couple, and then you've got stock you can compare. Now, most queen breeders use several breeders when they sell queens. They don't just breed from one queen, because it's either going to be fantastic or it's going to be a dud. So by selecting 4 or 5 breeders they breed from, if they're selling Italian queens, you're not going to get the same genetic stock if you buy 3 or 4 queens, because they should be mixed up. But, try different breeders, gives you an idea as to the productivity and what happens, with the different breeders. And at no 2 years, the breeder's going to be the same. They usually rotate the queens every 12 months, the breeders.
Thank you. We have another question from Sean from the web. Hopefully he's listening tonight. It's a bit involved, so Sean, if you're listening, I think I'll give it to Bruce to respond, but it's basically about the fact that he did his first split on a hive, and then a few days later the original hive swarmed with a virgin queen. They've caught that swarm, so now they're sitting with 3 hives, not certain whether all the queens are there, but the question is a little advice. So if you're listening, Sean, I might let Bruce read it and we might respond via email. It's you can give a comment.
I'll give a comment now. Okay, Sean. So, if hives have started swarm cells and you break them down, the hive still wants to swarm, and they often still do, even though there's no cells there because you've broken them down. They seem to have the mindset, they're going to go no matter what happens. And even if you take bees away, take brood away, and you did that, right? But it appears as though you did it when there are actual swarm cells in the colony. Now, if there are no swarm cells in the colony and you did that, the chance of them swarming is probably fairly low because you've taken bees away. So you've actually taken a swarm away by taking brood and bees away. But for some reason, if the cells are there, you break them down, they'll still go, even without cells, and they'll make more cells, and they'll put them back that much further because they've got to start from scratch, and they're that much later having a virgin queen in that colony. Your question about whether you've got queens or you haven't got queens, the simplest thing to do is, if you've got one hive or a hive with brood in it, that's a normal hive, pull a frame of brood out of that, or if you've got 2 other hives, which I think you have, and you've got one that's okay, take a frame of young brood. Now, by young brood, you need to see eggs or really small C-shaped larvae, uncapped cells, because they make queens out of larvae. They're only 24 hours of age that were going to be workers. So you've got a frame of brood in each of the other 2 hives where you're uncertain if you've got queens in it. If nothing, and then look in 3 days' time or 2 days, 3 days' time, if there's no queen cells started on those frames you put in, there's a queen there. If they've started queen cells on the face, which are emergency cells, now it's a small colony, I'd say 30 for emergency cells, that's from a normal big hive. So if it's only a nuke or a smaller hive, they might start 10 or so on the face of the comb. But they're going to be on the face of the comb because the only way they can get material to start a queen is to convert a worker cell that's got little larvae in it, and they're always on the face of the comb. So that's what I do. frame of brood in, each one, they start cells, they haven't got a queen, they're going to start emergency cells, you're going to have to wait for that queen to come out and mate for the brood queen itself. If not, they've got a queen in there. Now, if you do nothing, and they've been done for a period of time, the brood's too old that was in there originally, they can't make a new queen, so therefore those hives are doomed to die because they can't replace the queen themselves. Happy to send me an email or send Penny an email if that's not clear to you or whatever.
Any other questions, people? Ring in.
Ring in.
Win the prize.
Bruce, I'll ask one. One of the members turned up to the club this morning and he was showing me photos on his phone, and it was on one of the hot days on the weekend. And he has a brood box and he has a super on top, and there were so many bees out the front. They basically covered the front of the brood box, even going around the side. And he said to me, "Oh, what do you think's wrong?" And I said, "Well, they're probably hot, step one, but..."
Very good, Janice.
And I thought, maybe they need a bit more room.
Yes.
And I checked if he checked his brood box, and he said, "No, not yet." I said, "Well, that would be a very good idea to do that at this stage."
Yeah. So in really hot weather, it's 34 degrees Celsius inside a beehive. That's the temperature they incubate their young. So a beehive is just like a factory that's got an air conditioner in it, and the bees fan their wings. And that's why I said, when this is over, go down and have a listen to your bees, and if they're making a noise, they're air conditioning the hive to get the moisture out of the nectar. That's been 70% when they've collected today. They've got to get it down below 21 to make it into honey. So as Janice said, with bees all hanging up the front of the colony, that means that they were coming out to keep the hive at the right temperature of 34, because if it gets more than that, the brood will cook and the hive will die, and the wax will melt if it gets to 62, but it's not going to get that hot, obviously. So the way they cool the hive in really hot weather is to all hang up the front and have less bees in the colony. So you need, was it Steve? Well, anyway,
just a member.
Just a member, okay. So you need, I would be putting another super on that hive, which will give it more room and it'd be less likely to swarm. If you've got the time, it'd be worth opening the hive to see if there's any swarm cells there, because when they hang out that much, that's a reasonable indication that there's too many bees for that size cavity that you've got. And I'd certainly put another super on it and foundation to give them something to do. And by having a bigger room, that'll keep them cooler and they won't hang out as much. So you can tell the strength of a colony quite often by looking, on a hot day. The more bees are hanging out the front, the stronger the colony is. The ones with the most bees in, if you listen tonight, some are making more noise than others. The ones that are making the most noise, I've got the most bees in and are doing quite well. If you've got honey on your hives now, I'd extract it because bees are in a bit of a swarming frenzy. You give them something to do, take the honey off, that'll give them something to do and they're less likely to swarm, and you've got the honey, not them.
Bruce, can I add to that? I suggested to him when he checked the brood box, would it be an idea to take some of the brood upstairs to the super and then put a new frame in the brood box just so there's more room for the queen to lay as well?
Yeah, so that's a reasonably good idea because brood combs you need to probably replace every 3 years. So what happens with the brood frames is as each bee comes out, there's a cocoon left in the cell. And that's why brood frames get black, whereas new combs are white in colour. And if you've got a really sharp scalpel, it's a bit like the growth rings on a tree, you can cut a cell up a half or slice it and tell how many cycles of brood have been in that cell. The more cycles in that cell, the smaller the cell gets. So it's a good idea, as Jenna said, to put foundation in the brood box and lift up frames. The risk is that bees sometimes will start queen cells above an excluder if you do that. So what you've got to do is shake all the bees off the frame, and hopefully your bees are on the ground. If they're not, you'll have to shake them back into the box. You don't have to find the queen. If you shake them out the front, the queen will walk in with the bees. If you haven't got that, you need to shake them into the box because you don't want to take the queen away. Find the queen first, so much the better. Now the frames you lift up, it's important that there's no young larvae in those frames that are under 24 hours of age, because occasionally they'll start queen cells. So if you get cap brood to take up above, that's the smart thing to do. If you're unsure, in 3 or 4 days' time, have a look, and if the bees have started cells above the excluder, break them down, because in a way they're emergency type cells, and the queen can't control them. The queen controls what's in the bottom box. She can't control what's above an excluder. She probably doesn't want the cells up the top. She can't do anything about it because the bees have started them. So if you break those cells down, the hive's not necessarily going to swarm, but if they're left there, the hive will still swarm, but the virgins, when they hatch above an excluder, can't mate. So therefore your hive's going to die. So when you lift brood up above an excluder, always check 3 or 4 days later for queen cells. Doesn't always happen, but occasionally bees will start queen cells, above an excluder. That's important. So your advice was 100%, Janice.
Just another thing, Bruce. Bees hanging out the front of the hive, can that be because the hive might be heavily infested with small hive beetle?
It sometimes happens, but more so in the autumn. I've seen hives abscond with small hive beetle. I've actually went to a place in the autumn and the hive swarmed and the whole lot left, and it was just covered in small hive beetle. I caught it, took it home, put it on new frames. The hive's still there, it survived. So they actually left because of small hive beetle. So at times small hive beetle can force bees to abscond, and there's a lot of small hive beetle around the present time. But the best control, and people were here when Neil gave a talk on small hive beetle, and he had this secret message in his pocket that he was going to reveal at the end of the thing. And at the end of the thing he pulled a bit of paper out and he said, strong hives, small hive beetle don't bother them, which is pretty true. So I remember that, Dale. Dale's here tonight. And that's true. Sure, sometimes bees will hang out when there's some problem in the colony, like small hive beetle, and that's an issue. The best control for small hive beetle is Apixor, but then there's other non-chemical treatments, with vegetable oil and stuff like that. But there's a lot of small hive beetle around, particularly today was an ideal day for small hive beetle because it was humid, and they thrive in humid weather. Quite often, and they eat the brood, that's the problem. You can look at your hive and think there's something wrong with the queen, but small hive beetle like protein. There's a lot of protein in brood, so you'll often see hives with really patchy brood, but it's because the small hive beetle have actually eaten the brood. When the bees can hunt them out and get more control over the hive, the brood area will expand. So patchy brood, of recent times can be caused by a lot of small hive beetle in the hive. It's the larvae that do the damage, not the adults. You see the adults there. They can lay eggs and the eggs hatch within 1 day, and that's the problem with small hive beetle. Because they hatch within 1 day and they can lay 2,000 eggs each adult beetle, the hive can be just overcome. So the larvae are the problem, not necessarily the adults. But if you kill the adults or control the adults, that's great. If you go out at night, just before dark, people have been reporting, and I'm hoping to get a video on it, which I haven't got yet, but I've been promised. A beekeeper rang me up and said, it was just like a swarm of bees. Just on dusk, this swarm of small hive beetle come into my hive, right on dusk. And I've heard that. I've heard, people, commercial beekeepers shifting hives. Just on dusk, they load their hives if they're moving the open entrance, and they just see masses of small hive beetle turn up. So hive beetle seem to turn up just on dusk to invade the colony. I've never seen them on flowers. I've never seen them in the field. I don't know where they go. Supposedly they forage on blossom and stuff like that. But just on dusk is when they invade colonies.
Here, Bruce. You deserve a drink of water.
Thanks.
I'll read this one out while you're having a drink. This is from Candy. She's one of our new members, and she's just placing her first hive in her backyard, and she wants to know the direction she should be placing it. She has a very long and downward sloping block of land, and is it better to face it north or east? and is it okay to put it under a tree? Is it okay if it backs up against the sandstone wall? And she's got some water which is about 100 metres away, so she lives about 100 metres away from the river. Will that be sufficient water for the bees?
Okay, so I'll start with the water first, Katie. So, yeah, bees will find water, but you can't train bees to go to water. It'd be great if we could, because one of the big problems in Sydney's swimming pools, and there's no repellent you can use to repel bees from water. They love saltwater pools, they love chlorine, they love water. But one hive will not go to any one water source. I guess it's nature, they go to several water courses. Yeah, it's great from the point of view of neighbours to say you put water out for your bees, but they usually don't go to water close to a hive either. We know in really hot weather, it gets to 40 degrees, each colony will use 4 litres of water a day. Commercial beekeepers have to cart water to some arid areas, and they know how much water each colony uses by the number of colonies, the amount of water that disappears out of feeders that they take to water their bees, which they're protected from livestock. So, sure, Kenny, yeah, the water, the river's fine, but put water out, it's good publicity that if neighbours saying that you've got water for your bees. You need floats in it, because bees will drown in water that's not got floats in it, or lilies or something like that. Where to place hives in the backyard? The two key things are, don't face the entrance where there's going to be a light on at night, because the bees will think it's the sun and they'll tend to fly to that light, and they'll continue to fly to that light because they don't get home to tell their sisters don't go there, and you'll find dead bees on the ground. So never face the entrance of a hive to a light. That's critical. The other critical thing is you don't want the flight path. So bees are like aircraft, they use flight paths when they go out, and by using flight paths, you don't want the flight path over your clothesline. I once had a phone call from air traffic control because an Alitalia airline had gone over this lady's washing and she had all yellow spots on it. They didn't think it was bees, but you can conclude what they thought it was. And they went and got it all analysed. So air traffic control went out and got the thing analysed, and they found pollen in it. So bee excreta is yellow in colour, and so are moths. I had a case, the Ford dealership and BMW holding yard, where there was complaints that the bee excreta was taking all the paint off cars. It doesn't do that. But moths commonly excrete the same as bees, and you can get bees being blamed when in fact it's moths. And moths don't have any particular flight path. Car yards, you've got a light at night. All these cars were coloured in yellow spots. The people only turn up in the daytime and see yellow spots on the cars. It's got to be bees. The beekeeper lived down the road. I said, okay, the proof will be, at night, I want you to put a bit of white paper on your car at night and then have a look the next morning. They put the white paper on the car at night because the car yard was lit up to stop thieves and that going in, I guess. It turned out that it was moths that were putting all the yellow spots on the cars. So, in your backyard, I don't think it matters if the bees face north, south, east or west, but people say it's better to have the morning sun. You want them in a reasonably sunny area because there's a disease called nosema, and there's 2 strains of it, nosema apis, nosema cerani, and if bees are in moist areas or shaded areas, that disease is likely to be more prevalent in your hive. It's not common in Australia, but it's an issue. So, if you can put them in the sun, that's so much better. The sandstone wall is not going to be an issue for you. If when they leave the hive, if you can get them to fly up over a fence or up somewhere high, you're not going to have problems with your neighbours. If your neighbours can't see the bees, that makes it that much better, because people see a beehive, they complain. If they can't see them, it doesn't matter. But by getting them when they leave the hive up in the air, they're above human height, because bees will naturally sting as a defensive mechanism to move something that wasn't there when they went out. So if they go out and there was no one there, they're happy. They come back and there's a human standing there or something, they'll try and sting it to move it. So get them up high. I wouldn't put them too much under a tree because that's going to be shady. So anyway, to sum up, don't face the entrance to a light, don't have it over your clothesline, and if you can put the hive in the sun, so much the better. And if they can fly high when they leave the hive, so much the better.
Excellent.
All right, live, Bruce, we got a question from BB. What do you do with a frame that has been destroyed by SHB?
Okay, BB. Well, there's two things. You can melt the wax down and recover the wax if you wanted to. I find when small hive beetles get into a lot of comb, petrol is ideal, for killing wax moth larvae and adult wax moth. Petrol is registered to kill bees, and it doesn't seem to have a lot of residues because under the Australian Pesticide and Veterinary Medicine Act, petrol had to be registered, so they had to do all the tests to make sure there's no residues and no issues with using petrol. So that's one thing you can do, but probably better still is soapy water. So if you've got a lot of larvae and muck on your frames, if you can immerse the whole frame in soapy water, and soapy water blocks the breathing tubes up of the adults and the larvae of the small hive beetle. So that's probably far better than petrol. But if you got petrol and you had your bees for some reason, for a blower or something, you got petrol, if your backyard mix up soapy water, or just put the frames in water and everything will drown eventually. Now, if there's decent wax there and you want to recover it, well and good. If not, you can just cut the wax out and put it in a plastic bag or something and dispose of it, because there's no great risk if it's sealed up and there's no disease anyway, and dispose of it that way.
No match though with the petrol. Plain petrol.
Well, petrol, actually the fumes seem to do most of the damage, and I've burnt hundreds of hives with petrol in them. But you've got to vent it first. If you don't vent it, it can go bad, yes. And used to be a lot of hives around with fibro bottoms, and fibro, when it gets hot, it'll explode, but we're getting a bit off the track, but yeah. So petrol is a dangerous thing, but it's very effective at killing bees. Only beekeepers should know that. You only need a cupful and you kill a hive instantly.
Okay, Ryan has asked, the bees in his hive won't touch the two far left frames. Should I shuffle those frames to fix this issue, or will the bees still neglect the same far left frames?
No, Ryan. It's related to the number of bees in your colony. So we judge a hive by the number of frames covered with bees, not the number of boxes on the hive. So I think what you probably find, Ryan, is that you haven't got bees on those two outside frames because the population is probably not strong enough yet for that to happen. But if you've got bees, say it's an 8-frame box, I'm guessing, an 8-frame box, and bees are on 6 frames now, by all means get those 2 frames from the wall and move them in, say 2 frames on each side, so it becomes the 3rd frame in from the wall on each side, and you'll find that the bees will probably work them then, much quicker than if you leave them on the wall. It's totally related to the number of bees in the hive and the strength of the colony. Flow frames are quite different. You need to coat your flow frames with beeswax to encourage the bees to work, flow frames, but that's a different issue again. If you've got plastic foundation, you also need to coat that plastic foundation with beeswax. So you can just get some beeswax, melt it up. There's no diseases in beeswax because once it melts, the spores are all killed. So you just get a paintbrush and paint over that plastic foundation. And it doesn't matter how rough it is, the bees are great architects, great builders, so if it's as rough as hell, the architect bees will soon smooth it out and draw out the cells perfectly.
Okay. Robert wants to know, how do you requeen a hive?
You want to do that, or I can do it?
You can do it, Bruce.
I can do it.
Oh, Bruce was
Okay.
talking.
Right, so how to requeen a hive? Right, so what you need to do is order a queen bee. So you need to order a queen bee. And there are a number of magazines, that advertise queen bees, or the internet will advertise queen bees. They're $20, $25, something like that.
I think they've gone up now, Bruce.
Might be 30. I'm behind the time. Right.
35, 40.
I better start rearing queens.
You had.
More money than talking here. So when you order a queen, she'll come in a cage, which is either plastic or wood, and there'll be a number of worker bees in that cage. Excuse me. She's mated, and in one end there'll be icing sugar and honey, and quite often there's a plug at that end, so you need to take that plug out so the bees in the colony can get to that plug of icing sugar and honey. Now the idea of the icing sugar and honey is it allows the queen to come out slowly, and by coming out slowly she'll get the same odour as the bees in the colony, and that's how bees, accept other bees by the odour of the colony, particularly in the case of a queen. When she comes in the male, you need to be at home, preferably, because if the male gets delivered into a letterbox, there's a good chance the ants will attack the queen because she's there and the worker bees, and there's icing sugar, which ants love, and it gets hot, or quite often the postman will give it to you at your door, or you pick them up at the post office. They come in an envelope with little holes in. It's one of the few animals in the world you can post if things are animal, mineral and vegetable, and she'll live for a week. In that cage quite easily. I've had bees come out from America, post in America, when New South Wales Department of Agriculture Wales, they went to Wales and then they eventually come to Australia. So it took 3 weeks and they were all still alive. But that was all done through quarantine. That's a side issue. So there's no need to panic when you get the queen if it pours rain. When you get her, you're better off to put her in a drawer or somewhere where it's dark, so you keep them dark. They get a lot of light, they run around, that wears them out. And you need to put them somewhere where there's no ants. And you also don't want to have, residual pesticides in your house that they can come in contact with. But pest strips aren't common, but pest strips used to kill a lot of bees because it gets in the atmosphere. Right, so you've got your queen. When your queen arrives, you go to your hive and you've got to find the queen and you've got to remove the queen from the parent colony. The best thing is to use the minimum amount of smoke and just pull the frames out and slowly go through the frames to find the queen. It's not easy quite often. If you can't find the queen, if you've got a loose bottom where the bottom's not attached to the brood box, you need to put a queen excluder on the bottom, and you need to take the frames out of your hive. Or put the box, on the queen excluder, put the box on the queen excluder, take the frames out of that box and shake all the bees on the ground out the front, half a metre away. And make sure there's no bees left in the box when you've taken all the frames out. Once you've shaken all the bees off all the frames, put the frames back in the box. So what will happen is that the bees will walk back into that box and they'll go through the queen excluder up onto your frames of brood. Now the only things, and you need to wait about half an hour, go and have a cup of tea or something, wait for half an hour. Come back half an hour later, what you'll find is that all the bees would have gone into your box, up onto the brood frames, because bees, don't leave brood, and you'll have under that queen excluder, drones and the queen. So you need to take the box off with the brood in it, put it to one side, and use a little bit of smoke and carefully lift the excluder and you'll find the queen under the queen excluder there with the drones. If you've got a bottom that's nailed on, you need to have an empty box and put the excluder up higher in the brood and the bees will go through and you'll find the queen in the box below under the excluder that you put on the hive. You've got to kill the queen and then the original queen you kill or take her away from that colony. You can't put a new queen in where there is already a queen in the hive. So once you've found the queen, take her away or killed her and just squeeze them, that kills them. Now some people put the queen back in the hive so the bees know the queen's dead. Some people bury them in the ceremony and other people just chuck them away. It doesn't matter, as long as she's not there. That's the side issue. She's got to be there. You get that frame, that queen cage, and then you put the queen cage between two frames with the candy end slightly raised, because if there's escorts in that cage, which there is with the queen, and one dies and the candy end is down, it can block the exit from the queen to get out of the hive, out of the cage. So have it raised a bit that it can't block the exit for the queen to come out. So what happens is the bees in the hive will then chew through that candy, and that's been food for the bees with the queen. And after 2 or 3 days, the bees will release that queen. She's got their same odour, and she'll be accepted by that colony. Now you've got to leave it for 10 days, because if you look too quickly, because she's a new queen, the bees sometimes what we call ball them. They get around the queen and suffocate her. So wait for 10 days, have a look 10 days later, that's important, and just see if there's brood in the hive. If there's brood in the hive, you've successfully re-queened your hive. No brood in the hive, you need to put a frame of brood in, because it means the introductions fail. You know, you get 80, 90, 95% acceptance of queens put in, in cages. But you don't re-queen a hive that's got swarm cells in it, because that queen can't lay. As soon as she comes out, she'll swarm. So never re-queen a hive with any type of queen cell in it, ever, because you won't keep that queen.
Interesting.
Yes.
You got any more, Penny?
No, I'm right.
Denise has asked, off swarming, a way of preventing moisture build-up in winter in your hives.
Okay, yeah, some colonies seem to get a lot more condensation in than others. I think it's partly related to the number of bees in the colony and the conditions and all sorts of things. I think you need the entrance sloping forward, that helps. And the more critical thing is, to not over super the hive, have too many boxes on it, because the condensation tends to get under the lid. That's where it gets. The other thing you can do is to, Denise, put what we call a mat. So you get a piece of plastic or lino or some sort of vinyl, and you cut it smaller than the internal measurements of the box that you've got. So if it's an 8-frame box, you cut the lino or plastic slightly smaller so the bees can get around the edge, and you put that on the top of the frames in the super with the lid on, and the lid goes on top of that. Now if there's any condensation in the lid, it'll drop onto the mat and not onto the bees. If there's no mat there, the condensation can tend to drop onto the bees, which is not good. I don't think there's any simple way. I've seen hives with vents in the lid, they still get condensation in them. You don't need any ventilation in your lid, because the hive's air conditioned. If you've got ventilation in your lid, it buggers up the air conditioner. It's just like having a house with a window open and an air conditioner going. You don't need vents in your lid, definitely not.
With condensation, Bruce, and it creates mildew, is that an issue for the bees?
Doesn't seem to be urgent. So Ian Phillips, one of the committee members, just asked a question about, does it cause mildew and cause an issue? Mildew doesn't seem to affect bees to any extent, but I mean it's better to have the colony dry. That's the thing, and I think over supering, tends to lead to more condensation than under super, than not having enough super there.
Okay, off topic again. Razor Lemon wants to know why we don't have bumblebees in New South Wales.
Good, Razor Lemon, good question. Okay, so we can do other questions, we don't have to set swarming. So, Environment Australia objected to the introduction of bumblebees into Australia. The beekeeping industry was in two minds, about bumblebees coming into Australia. They're very common in New Zealand and other places like that, and we do have bumblebees in Australia because they're in Tasmania, and that's part of Australia. I've got to say that. I'm not a Tasmanian, but they get pretty touchy. So several years ago, bumblebees got into Tasmania. And they can come in just as a queen in someone's bag or something like that. They overwinter as queens and they can start off a colony. The beekeeping industry in Australia didn't object to bumblebees coming in, but Environment Australia did. And a number of environmental groups objected to bumblebees coming in because they do what we call buzz pollination. Because they're big and heavy, they land on a plant and it shakes. And by shaking, the pollen's dispersed from the anthers, whereas honeybees actually have to use their mandibles and legs and that to collect pollen. So it's a different type of pollination. There's huge pressure to get bumblebees into Australia, particularly from the tomato industry and from the glasshouse industry, because bumblebees are pretty effective pollinators in glasshouses, but so are Trigona, which are the Australian native bees, and I've been involved with Armidale Uni doing stuff with Trigona and honeybees, in greenhouses for Armidale Uni. So We don't have them because the government will not approve of bumblebees being on mainland Australia. Because they become so widespread and endemic in Tasmania, they haven't been able to wipe them out. They're becoming inbred in Tasmania, and some people down there are agitated because of the inbreeding and they're not efficient. There was a move to bring more stock in. I don't know where that went, to try and get genetic variation in the bumblebees in Tasmania. Yeah, I'm absolutely amazed there's no bumblebees on the mainland, because anyone goes to Tasmania, you drive your car onto the ferry, you go on, you come off. I've driven around Tasmania, had bumblebees come in the car because they had the window open, I let them out, probably 50 kilometres away from where they first got in because I didn't notice them. They love radiators of vehicles, and that's how European wasp spread. They got caught in the radiators of cars and trucks, particularly trucks, because they all turned up where trucks stopped. So, it's possible they can come in from Tasmania. They haven't yet. There doesn't seem to be heavy checks about whether they do or they don't come in. So the beekeeping industry is not objected to bumblebees coming in, but Environment Australia has, and the government policy is there's to be no bumblebees on the mainland. New South Wales Amateur Beekeepers Association has been involved in doing surveillance for bumblebees. A few years ago, there was an alleged bumblebee finding in Parramatta ABA area. The Department of Ag contacted the ABA to organise surveys of that particular area. It was around Denison and all the streets around. So a heap of ABA volunteers walked the streets. I became involved in it. We didn't find any evidence of any bumblebees, but they'd actually sent in a bumblebee supposedly they'd found in their garden. So from time to time, if there's any reports, New South Wales DPI compliance and biosecurity become involved in trying to track down and get evidence if there's been bumblebees in Australia, and the ABA supports providing staff or volunteers to survey for any bumblebees that happen to be around.
Do bumblebees live in a hive like European bees do?
Yeah, they're community dwellers,
Okay.
They live in small boxes, yeah. And they have one queen, and unlike honeybees, they can overwinter as a queen, and then a queen can start a colony off, whereas honeybees need, much more bigger population,
Okay.
Paul asks, will an aggro queenless hive settle down once a queen cell hatches or a queen is introduced?
Yeah, it should do. So queens control the colony, and you have pheromones that control the docility and the genetics of the colony. Hives that are queenless are usually much more aggressive. So queenless hives roar and run around the hive as though they're uncontrolled. So usually when a queen's present in a colony they're more docile, but there's no guarantee of that. Some colonies of bees are just super aggressive, and I went to Norfolk Island, and the bees on Norfolk Island are just absolutely killers. You go near a hive, they just attack. Norfolk Island's only 5x7, and the bees there, genetically are super savage because of the inbreeding, I think. So, aggressive hives normally, aggro and cranky stuff. So you requeen the hive, that's far. They're likely to become quieter. A hive that's been queenless for a long time is fairly difficult to requeen because the bees are all old and aggressive. So it's usually the older bees that are more aggressive. The guy that I talked to about requeening a hive, if you can't find a queen, another common trick is, which we've done here, is to just pick the hive up and shift it and wait half an hour, put a box where the original hive was. All the field bees will go back to where the original hive was, into just a cardboard box, and you've only got nurse bees in your hive, so you've got a lot less bees to look through to find the queen. Once you find the queen, kill her, introduce the queen and put the hive back where it originally was.
Denise wants to know how long before a mated queen will start laying.
Okay, so Denise, they mate on the 5th and 7th day, and then she starts to lay on the 10th day. So, 5 days after she first mates, she'll start to lay. But she hatches from the cell, and then 10 days later she lays, because the 5th and the 7th day they normally mate. But you're better off to wait longer, so there's plenty of evidence that it's brood there. To find eggs is not easy, and to find queens is not all that easy either. So the life cycle is, queen lays an egg in a cell, 16 days later that queen hatches, and then she mates and she'll start to lay 10 days after that. So the answer is 16 plus 10, which is 26 days from the time the queen lays the egg till the queen lays.
Ryan wants to know, is there a way to tell if I have a young or an old queen?
Yeah, sure, Ryan. They're like people. And it's got something to do with hair too. So I'm an old drone. So usually old queens have got not as much hair on their thorax, so that's the bit where the wings hook on. And the real characteristic is how they move on the frames. So by pulling the frame out and seeing a queen, young queens actively run around the hive when they come to see the light, and they're much more active than older queens. Older queens are very slow moving on the frames. The other way is, but it's got to do with mating as well, if queen bees that are young lay in a regular pattern. So by laying in a regular pattern, all the brood in one area is all going to be sealed, it's all going to be unsealed. If a queen's old, she becomes erratic in the laying, so you might get a little bit of sealed brood, then some unsealed brood, sealed brood, unsealed brood. So old queens, what we call the brood pattern, is not what we call even, whereas young queens, the brood pattern is more even. So you pull a frame out, the whole frame's capped, it means as a young queen, she's laid in a systematic manner. But I look at them, how they move on the frame and the amount of hair they got on their body. Because they've been brushing against other bees, they lose hair, and they walk slowly compared to a young queen.
No, I think that's
no more
it.
questions
No.
at the moment, so
I think we're going good. Yeah.
we might
We'll wrap it up.
Wrap it up and move on to any business you want to talk about.
Yeah. Nothing really. Nothing here for me to add on to that. So thank you everyone for logging on, and I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. That's been it's been really good, and we thank Bruce so much. Bruce, your knowledge on bees is just wonderful, and it's great to have you here. Thank you. Also like to thank Emmanuel for the wonderful job he's done tonight. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. It's been a different experience for us, and we can only get better. So we will have a few other guest speakers coming to these live streams when we do a few more. Hopefully next month we'll do another one. And so yeah, look on the website. Look on the keep your inbox open for your newsletters, and we will tell you what's coming soon. Thank you.